working? Yes, good, right. Welcome to the last session. So conscious we're between you and cocktails, but we'll try and keep it interesting. I noticed I got the same suit and shirt on as I had in the video. I promise you it's a clean shirt. But I did only bring one suit to South Africa. Look, we've had a fantastic session today, speaking about South African capital markets in the context of harvesting growth, growing and accessing liquidity, improving market resilience, and kind of underpinning all that ultimately is technology. So this is the technology section to sort of finish off the day. So I'm joined by three esteemed colleagues representing some major infrastructure firms and technology firms. So we're going to have a little chat about today about some of the key trends. But before we do that, perhaps if you could each briefly introduce yourself, starting with Eleni.
Yeah, hi everybody. Eleni Coldry from Equinix. Equinix is the world's largest data center operator and home to the largest co-located capital markets ecosystem.
Hi folks, Gordon MacArthur, CEO and founder of Beeks. We are a cloud computing company responsible for GSE's Colo 2.0. So we work with exchanges and banks, buy side and sell side on low latency infrastructure.
Great. Alex Markey from AWS, also a cloud computing company. I lead business development for all financial market infrastructure across all asset classes, as well as train connectivity in the cloud.
Awesome, thanks guys. So look, three very experienced industry colleagues here who I'm sure have got lots to say on the topic of technology. What I'm going to hope to do is turn this much more into an open discussion, so it's not just me reading out questions. But what I would do just to kick off is ask each of you in turn, maybe just give a couple of minutes view on what do you see as key technology trends in capital markets, specifically around trading. There's a lot of things going on in the technology sector. We're going to talk about some of them, but just give us your views on what you see as hot topics at the moment. Maybe again start with you, Eleni.
Yeah, sure. So we host 17 different metros where exchange infrastructure is hosted around the world. So we do see different trends in different regions, but one of the biggest parts, and there's been a lot of talk about this today already, but is how to find growth. So how to scale globally and find where where the alpha is, and that may be in new territories that you need to move into. It might be in new segments. So there's a lot of talk in Europe about retail and getting access, the Saving and Investment Union, for example, and we also see a lot of activity of kind of emerging markets trying to get access to the major financial centers. On the regulatory front, we see a lot about resilience, both from the likes of the EU, Digital Operational Resiliency Act, but also from the customers themselves. And I think that's a pretty familiar topic to those here in the market in terms of creating a stable technology foundation, because obviously this is critical infrastructure and critical financial funds, right? So resilience on the network front, resilience on the technology platforms. And then in terms of technology, I think everyone's waiting to say AI. Everyone's kind of steering away from it. But a lot of thinking around that, a lot of testing, and waiting to see how that really plays out in the market.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Gordon, from your point of view?
Similar stuff, actually. So a lot of the conversations we have is around clients trying to manage an ever-growing technology roadmap, right, or a footprint. People are talking to us a lot about emerging markets, the ASEAN exchanges, South American exchanges. There's a lot of exchange movement going on, so how do we manage that infrastructure footprint, the networking, market data requirements across 40 or 50 colos globally now with an ever shrinking team of people to support it? So a lot around that. AI we're going to talk about, so we'll cover that later.
Yeah, sure. From, I guess, a cloud adoption perspective, one of the biggest trends we've been seeing over the last, call it, decade or so, is increasingly latency-sensitive trading applications running on cloud infrastructure. And that's both kind of critical matching engines across microstructures, as well as customers or market participants running their execution engines, algos, OEMSs on the cloud too. And we're seeing that on, I guess, two dimensions. One is what we call like public cloud, or like an AWS region or a local zone. And also from a hybrid perspective too, where we kind of will deploy an outpost rack or a hybrid solution within a customer's exchange's data center or an Equinix facility. And that's kind of across asset classes. A lot of the world's crypto exchanges run AWS, like Binance, Coinbase. Kraken, a lot of thick marketplaces, so fixed income, currency, commodity exchanges are increasingly deploying in the cloud. Makes sense, quote driven, not as latency sensitive as equities, and no fair and equal access requirements like TrueMid, Broadridge's LTX platform, NABS exchange, and ABAX exchange, a new commodities exchange that launched in Singapore. And even equities exchanges. Aquis in the UK migrated their primary and secondary listing exchange to AWS last year, and the Astana International Exchange is also running the cloud as well. So really kind of a global trend that we're seeing. We're working with the industry to launch cloud-native colocation environments. I'll kind of spare the technical details for the audience, but about a year and a half ago, we partnered with quite a few crypto exchanges and high-frequency trading firms who are trading in the cloud to launch the world's first colocation environments on AWS, which Coinbase and One Trading are doing. And then on the hybrid deployment model too, that kind of really took up steam about 3.5 years ago when Nasdaq announced a strategic partnership with AWS. There were a few things in there, but one of the primary ones was migrating all their North American markets to AWS, leveraging Outposts. Since that announcement, they've gone live with 4 exchanges and saw about a 10% latency improvement. TMX in Canada also launched an ATS in the States on that solution, and we're seeing broad-based interest from other exchange operators, like JC and other market participants, in leveraging that for their own solutions, and that's global
Cool.
trend.
Okay, I think we might come back on touch on that some of those points later, and the sort of where does cloud, on-prem, colo, how does that whole spectrum of technology solutions kind of fit together? And I think you three guys really well placed to talk about that. One of the things I would like to do during this session as well, I think there's always a danger that when you talk about financial markets technology, it's easy to fall into what people are doing in New York, London, Tokyo. And South Africa is a very interesting market. It's a sophisticated, mature market, strong regulation. It's got some competing liquidity pools. We talked a lot about that today. But also, ultimately, the pie is only so big. So there is cost sensitivities. To be honest, there's cost sensitivities in pretty much every financial market at the moment, particularly some of the emerging regional markets. So we should bear that in mind. And I'll kind of come on to that point, because I think one of the we might as well dive straight into the AI discussion. And I think we're going to look at it a little bit from an infrastructure perspective, because we're not quants, but we do the plumbing, the guys up here today. And I think, market data is absolutely fundamental to efficiently operating capital markets. Increasingly, that's getting expensive, but also increasingly people want to extract more value, more actionable insight out of that. And there's some great new tools coming to market to do that. Machine learning's been around for a while. AI has been the big hot topic or hype topic. Perhaps we can discuss that. But what are you guys seeing in practical AI use cases that are potentially being deployed specifically around capital markets and ideally trading? And what do you think some of the potential challenges or hurdles are for adoption of AI more broadly on the trading and execution side of the business? I don't know if anyone wants to put their hand up for that.
I mean, I can start now. I mean, listen, AI, it's the ultimate hype cycle, right? There's, to answer what use cases do we see using proper predictive AI at the moment, very few. We have lots of conversations with banks, brokers, and exchanges who've been given budget to do AI. Nobody really knows what that means. We have bizarre conversations about, with these departments that have got big budgets and they don't know what they're doing. There are AI initiatives. We are looking at some stuff. Beeks personally are in a lucky position where we capture all the data that exchange creates, right? So we have the data to start running models and start running tools on top of. And there are things like anomaly detection, right? There's something weird going on in your infrastructure, and we can detect it using more machine learning than AI, right? But when you start looking into forecasting and predicting and latency prediction across venues so you can tailor your algos for specific performance, is difficult, right? And it's very early stages. We do see a lot of conversations going on around it, but it's like blockchain, right? People are going to spend lots and lots of money, and there's going to be lots and lots of failures. There will be some successes in it, but it's the ultimate hype cycle at the moment, and it needs to be dragged back to reality, because it's difficult, and a lot of the models that we've looked at and are building ourselves are difficult. And the size of the data that's created, maybe not so much in emerging markets, but in the big US exchanges that are pumping out 100 gigabit per second, the compute and the infrastructure you need to analyze that and make meaningful decisions from it in colo is huge, and it's cost prohibitive, right? So it's an expensive hobby at the moment for a lot of people.
So that's an interesting point. I think we might come back to the sort of data consumption and power requirements and so on. But I wanted maybe Ellen, you were asking to pick up on the point which I think I've seen as there is a lot of hype around it, and AI-driven quant funds and so on. First, I think we should say what we're talking about, is generative AI. It's actually, because I think there is a danger that, yes, it all sits under AI, but we've been doing machine learning for years, and I think the Ved earlier on the panel was talking about, we've been using algos for years, and we're using data modeling and so on to do that. But I think probably we're talking a little bit more about generative AI and how much of a black box that is. But you mentioned, Gordon, about some use cases around that perhaps a little bit safer around analyzing vast amounts of data. So it could be surveillance, it could be systems performance and so on. And that's quite interesting, because that seems like a safer entry-level point for these kind of tools.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on the hype cycle piece, and where are we in the cycle? And I think there's a clear distinction between your training and your tuning of your models, and then putting it into the real life production, into the inference. And so, the HFT firms and the prop trading firms have for a long time had their research clusters growing and growing. And now, we've definitely seen a trend there with the customers in those space where they might have run those workloads in exchange colocations. The volume of data, the size of the compute that those research clusters are now requiring means that they are separating that. And I think that's where we've got to really think about and understand the workload placement that is appropriate for any kind of analytics platforms, whether we're going to give it an AI badge or whatever we're going to give it. But I think that's been a really interesting trend for us to see those in that space that are really consuming the volumes of data that you're talking about, separating those workloads from the low latency workloads and building out, there are examples obviously in Europe of them building these huge clusters up in, say, Norway or Finland because of the power costs. And I think that's the training. The interesting piece there, I think, is also that the network element, because of the volume of data, is starting to really impact the business case. And so whereas initially it was put that training wherever you wanted it, it is coming slightly closer to the market so that the network costs don't kind of kill the business case. And then when it comes to the inference and they're actually putting it live, obviously there's a whole value chain of players that are involved in the world of trading. But are we seeing GPU in exchange colocations? Absolutely. Being deployed by HFT firms in the prop community, also being deployed by some of the data vendors and the risk analytics, et cetera. It's there. But more often what I'm hearing about from our customers, these would be tier one sell sides, is we could be testing some of these technologies in our own laboratories. They have these test labs. However, the pace of change in the technology around AI is so fast that the tech is obsolete. So what they're saying to the OEMs in the AI space is, the NVIDIAs of the world is, don't ship me the boxes, I'll go and test in a hyperscaler. And so we are seeing a lot of testing in hyperscale, and then when it comes to the inference and it's in production, it moves into private. And I think that privacy piece is really key. Privacy, regulation, compliance, particularly in this space where there's so much IP around it. So I think it's a journey, and the cycle, where you are as a firm dictates where you might be placing that.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But Alex, you must be loving it, right? Like all this new data being crunched and models being run. Work for one of the biggest cloud providers. It's like happy days, right?
I guess so. And I'm like twitching over here because AI, I've been programmed to talk, about Gen AI and how the world's going to change. So I think two really important distinctions. I couldn't agree more with kind of more traditional AI has been around for well over a decade, right, in capital markets at every stage of the trade life cycle. And there are many kind of big trends that we've seen from cloud adoption, kind of moving data from siloed databases on-prem to more modern, agile data storage solutions like a data lake, a data warehouse. So you can consume these massive data feeds from multiple different exchanges, integrate them with kind of alternative data sets, semi and unstructured data, and then conduct a whole range of analyses in real time, kind of achieving agile analytics. But the generative AI kind of really turbocharged that. I think before OpenAI emerged, we had hundreds of thousands of firms that were leveraging AWS for their machine learning training needs. Now the number, I can't even keep track of it, the rate of increase. And I think the hype cycle really hit in 2013 where everyone had a Gen AI strategy, but I had many conversations with customers globally around, hey, what is an LLM? How does this really work? How is this different from traditional language model? Traditional machine learning? Is a foundation model the same as an LLM? Then in the back half of 2023 and beginning of 2024, we saw this explosion of POCs. And in the last 6 months, more and more of those are going into production, right? And I fully agree, at trade is a little bit tricky, just because of the latency requirements and how to counterbalance that with costs and doing inferences at scale. But what we've been seeing is, on the pre-trade side, a lot of customers are leveraging Gen AI to just streamline efficiency, extract information, and drive product differentiation. Bridgewater, for example, they launched an intelligent assistant, a quantitative research assistant that can conduct financial analysis at the level of a first or second year quant, and it can respond to queries in natural and code-based submissions. Vanguard launched a series of investment glide paths, which are dynamically adjusting baskets of asset allocations for Americans for their retirement accounts. On-prem, they were able to achieve kind of 20 or so of these glide paths. By leveraging the cloud, they kind of dramatically increased that number to 1,200. Unique paths that leverage traditional AI, but now are using generative AI to kind of recommend solutions for salespeople to offer to their customers and dynamically adjust that through the a customer's retirement lifecycle. Trading is still kind of, as mentioned, on the traditional AI side of thing. A lot of innovation is there. I know the shiny object is Gen AI, but we're seeing even exchanges leverage AI to launch AI-based order types. NASDAQ launched DMello about a year and a half ago, which is the industry's first AI-based order type, and trained that on AWS. And by leveraging AI, so I mean, it gets a little bit technical, but they kind of dynamically adjust holding periods and crossing of liquidity. And by launching the AI version of this order type, they increased fill rates by 20%. And market performance from a mark-out perspective by 11%, so increase in market quality. And we're seeing these trade recommendation engines kind of proliferate, especially in the fixed income world too. On the post-trade side, surveillance is a huge one. A lot of exchanges are using generative AI to streamline the investigative work. NASDAQ, NYSE, FINRA, regulated in the States, forgive me, have all spoken publicly about how previously they were using traditional AI to scale analysts' work and kind of the investigative process. But now they're integrating generative AI to make the extraction of information and investigation of issues faster. The numbers that are being thrown out are about 35% productivity enhancement. We're seeing customers use Gen AI for settlement processes, right? Extracting confirmation from a range of sources, emails, Bloomberg runs, chat, even recorded chat transcripts. CCPs are using generative AI to predict margining concerns, margin calls, and settlement failure risk, and minimize manual processes involved in that. And of course, leveraging Gen AI to help with coding. So if you have to update a mainframe and use COBOL or an old version of Java, we're seeing a lot of uptake in that. Last one, sorry, because this is quite important. We're seeing customers launch common platforms for their entire workforce to bridge the skill gap to your first question about kind of the limits for adoption. So you don't have to be a super quant or machine learning expert. You can be someone not technical like me and build Gen AI applications. So we have BBVA, JP Morgan, SocGen, NASDAQ AN, have all kind of spoken publicly about how they've built common Gen AI platforms for their entire workforce and are appealing to both citizen developers like me and kind of more kind of machine learning specialists to build AI applications at scale.
Yeah. So, look, I think a lot of really exciting things happening and the industry is moving quite fast. I guess my concern is, what does that mean to a cost-pressured mid-tier broker? And, I think this is probably the wrong panel to talk about some of the applications and tools coming out that are going to make it easier, but actually one thing this panel should be able to talk about is, fundamentally with any modeling, whether it's machine learning, AI, generative AI, it's the data that makes the model. And our industry is highly fragmented. If you look at a typical trading ecosystem, different systems generating data in different formats. Orchestrating that data is a challenge and can be very costly. I mean, Gordon, obviously, Beeks is one of the top managed infrastructure providers. Is that the sort of thing that you guys would get involved in, and how do you help firms manage large data sets and data infrastructure?
So managing it and more around moving it, right? Moving it around the world, as people trade on more and more venues, moving data around the world, moving it in and out of hyperscalers is a very expensive exercise, right? So more and more people looking to store in colo and archive into the cloud, right? So it's difficult, it's expensive, the cost of storage reduces, quite substantially, but moving, monitoring and managing it is more difficult than the storage, right? Again, very US-centric, but the data volumes from the US, if you're trying to arb against that anywhere else in the world and moving it around, it's a hugely expensive exercise, right? So people are always trying to find ways of managing and monitoring that a bit more effectively. So we get involved, but it's, predominantly we are, a kind of low latency infrastructure company, not a cloud storage company. So we don't do huge amounts of it, but we get involved a little bit.
I think just to add to that point, I think what we're seeing is because of those data transit costs and the complexity around it, the advice is move your model to the data.
Yeah.
Right. So where you look at the large market data vendors and you see how they architect across the world in terms of their ingestion of data and then their distribution, on a smaller scale, that's how everyone needs to be thinking, right? And if you're small scale, to your point, the kind of how are we democratizing access into the analytics world? There are ISVs out there, there are service providers out there that are helping do this at scale, but effectively, where is the data originating? We're not just talking about market data. There's all sorts of other signals that might be kind of internal data that you want to integrate as well. There might be alternative data sources. But, I think the whole excitement around AI and the models that you can run now is just, where can you get the signals from that gives you differentiation? And so understanding where the data comes from and then architecting your models around the physicality of those origination points is really key. And that's where, I guess, why we're having this conversation is we are the plumbers of the industry, how we're actually putting all of this together. And I think that consideration around efficiency as well as performance, that is really what makes or breaks the business case.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I spent a lot of years at sort of Reuters running their global market data business, and I think a lot of people, you talk market data and they go, oh yeah, you buy market data from exchanges or Reuters or Bloomberg or LSEG today, I guess. And actually, that's almost like the tip of the iceberg, because although there's huge volumes of data being distributed from like global trading venues, global data consolidators, but the amount of data generated internally, be that analytics, position keeping, risk, and so on. And I think one of the things we're starting to see as a massive opportunity is a lot of that data is formatted in different ways. So you've got different protocols, you've got fixed, you've got native, you've got binary, all sorts of different formats, and it needs to be enriched or combined with other data for certain usage. And I think a big challenge for a lot of banks is how do they manage that information through their trading ecosystem, both externally and internally, not just from an infrastructure and plumbing perspective, but also like a sort of a data model perspective as well. And that creates a lot of friction and challenges in the industry.
Yeah, and I think really good points raised, but I have a slightly different kind of take on this. I've heard kind of pain points from a data egress perspective. For reference, there's no charge for landing data within AWS or other cloud providers, to my knowledge too, but I don't really kind of focus on what they do. It's our policy, we have to focus on customers, we're customer obsessed, all that stuff. That sounded a little shadier than I expected it to be. But what we do see just from a workload perspective is, large volumes of data aren't really shipped up from an on-prem to data source or an exchange, right, back to the cloud and back again. Like, I don't really know of any customer, and I speak to quite a few, who are, for example, landing the Opera feed in AWS and then turning around and shipping that out again. What we do see, however, is customers kind of consuming data into AWS and then leveraging that to kind of solve some of the pain points that you mentioned, right? Kind of getting that end-to-end visibility on their entire data estate across different business lines, different geographies, different asset classes, to power things like backtesting and research on the quant fund side, right? And there are many that have spoken publicly about how they've been doing this for well over a decade. Bridgewater, AQR, QRT, Acadian, Balyasny are kind of doing all their backtesting research strategy development in AWS, and when they kind of identify their signals and their algorithms, they'll push that back on-prem too, like a Beeks into an Equinix, right? And that kind of has created a pull effect for many of the data vendors to host their data natively within the cloud, right? First started the likes of Bloomberg, Refinitiv, now part of LSEG, FactSet, S&P, Vela, right, have made their historic data natively available to AWS to be easily consumed, where a lot of this backtesting and researching was done. Then a lot of exchanges have made their data available natively in the cloud, like LSEG, NYSE, NASDAQ, B3, JPX in Japan. The list is very, very long. To kind of, again, be more agile, more cost-effective, and be global, right? And then we saw a lot of banks, to your point about the challenge of getting end-to-end visibility, do more risk calculations in real time and not batch at the end of the day, remove bottlenecks from high-performance computing at cost-optimized deployment models. That was another big use case that we saw to solve that exact problem. So JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, SocGen, Santander have talked about how they can now do millions of risk calculations a second, right, which they couldn't do on-prem at about half the cost. So a really big use case that we've been seeing in the cloud, right? And it's not just kind of from market participants. We see exchanges do this too. That goal of creating a golden source of truth for their entire operations, and then at the data lake level, create data warehouses for specific use cases like surveillance, like billing and reporting, right? Like customer billing, like risk systems, analytics environments, right? And have that clear point of view of a customer from exchange to post-trade to settlement has been a really big use case with JPX talking about building their JLake platform that is a common data solution for all their internal use cases and customer-facing data workflows. NASDAQ has spoken about this too as their single source of truth, a really big use case. FINRA, their market surveillance platform, which is now an exabyte in scale. It's the largest data repository in the world, runs in AWS, purely for that challenge of ingesting multiple different data sources at high volumes, optimizing cost, and enabling their analysts to do more with kind of less resources. So big use case and trend we've been seeing. But again, I think for the latency optimized deployments, definitely remaining on-prem next to a matching engine.
Just to pick up on some of the things you're saying there, there's different data requirements per different, per applications that anyone's running. And I think that just talks to the complexity you were saying, Mike, is that any single firm has multiple, front, middle, back applications that all need data, but have different kind of latency profiles, different depth profiles. And so how does a single firm create a cohesive market data or analytics strategy when sometimes they need it in a cloud, they might need it in 2 or 3 different clouds because they've got vendors that are, just selecting an AWS or selecting a Google. They also need it on-prem, they need it in colo. It is, it is a complex picture. I think ISVs have a role where they can simplify that for you. But, ultimately what the consumers of the data, the buy side and the sell side, what they need is, vendors that can offer them the right kind of data wherever they need it, in a really easily consumable fashion. And so the distribution strategy of an ISV and of market data vendors is a really critical competitive advantage. You have to be able to get it to your customers where they need it, when they need it. And that is going to be cloud, it's going to be multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, on-prem, exchange colo. It's for the vendors to simplify that.
I think that's absolutely right. We have an increasingly complex industry, regulation making it more complex, and some of the innovation that comes to market, which is great, and it creates commercial opportunities, but again, it layers on more complexity. So, I think we can safely say our world's not getting any simpler anytime soon, and we'll look even older and more haggard when we come here next year, right?
The magic button.
But I mean, to that, and again, sort of thinking of firms that are budget stretched, certainly resource stretched, and have more and more on their plate. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Gordon, perhaps sort of start with you. Where are we? The sort of what's the state of SaaS and managed service, and how is that helping, remove some of this complexity for your average financial firm, be that sell side or buy side?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, people are more and more looking for a kind of one-stop solution to a trading infrastructure, right? There's, you know, your network complexity, there's infrastructure complexity. I said before, people are trading in 40 or 50 venues around the world. Middle and back office applications seems to have moved into the more generic hyperscaler clouds, and that's fine, you know. And we talked about this last year, where, you know, the front office or the matching engine still remaining in colo, right? I'm sure Alex will disagree with me, but I'm not aware of a single major equities exchange that is looking at moving the front office matching engine into the cloud, right? So, you know, this complexity of hybrid cloud is going to continue. It's going to be pervasive for a long time, right? There is no one-stop solution that everything moves up into the cloud and you've got service providers in there. So there's going to be the hybrid architecture that the world runs in at the moment is going to continue, right? And that's, you know, that creates costs, but yeah, we get asked more and more for, you know, these end-to-end managed services across a huge amount of colo estates globally to try and keep, you know, people's costs down, right? So I don't see that ending, yeah.
I think that's right. I mean, I think I don't see that sort of spectrum of solutions. The balance might change, but it won't go away. I mean, as you know, as a business leader at a financial institution, you've got to balance, you know, business outcomes, relative performance, as in things like latency, throughput, and so on, and ultimately against budget. So, you know, if you something's got to give on that spectrum. So ultimately, you're always going to have a mix for optimized results in that. And I guess you see that from your world, Eleni.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that the industry finds the efficiencies, and the industry is clustered in ecosystems where, you know, participants across the value chain are sitting under the same roof so that they can exchange data easily and quickly, be that for low latency reasons, or be that just for facilitating large exchange of data, non-latency sensitive workloads. And I think that's the place where, you know, yes, it's hybrid cloud, but also it is about how do you identify where your value chain is and how can you seamlessly move between clouds and colo. And that's the role that we play, as we see ourselves as the edge of the capital markets and the cloud, where that interchange can happen seamlessly. So if you want to use the efficiency of the hyperscalers, perfect, those are the workloads. If you start getting to a certain scale and private infrastructure is actually going to make it more cost effective for you, or if you've got privacy needs, bring it private and use like a private cloud vendor. It's finding the edge that gives you the ability to move your applications the way you need, but also to meet upstream and downstream. And I do think that the ecosystem has naturally found a home next to each other, and I think that continues to happen. So yes, there's fragmentation to a certain extent in terms of trading, but in terms of the clustering of the industry, I think that's stronger than ever.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm slightly conscious of time. Just want to give an opportunity to the audience if anyone's got any questions. Do you have any energy at this time of day? No, that's good. And look, I'm sure.
Stunned into silence.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We can get the bar. No, but the guys are going to be upstairs.
Drinks on the mind
afterwards, and I'm sure you can corner them. You obviously stunned them into silence with your perceptive insight of technology.
It was the AI.
Yeah.
I have one thing to add.
I could have predicted that, by the way.
I'm trying to steer away.
Wow.
But no, I definitely agree, you know, with quite a few of the points have been raised. You know, and when you think about microstructure, it kind of comes down to the actual market type, right? But also kind of the clustering, the liquidity centers of gravity that have existed for quite some time globally in our set. And, you know, that's why we've kind of invested a lot over the last 5 years in our hybrid solutions, right? That outpost that I mentioned before that has been optimized for ultra-low latency performance. That happened because NASDAQ had migrated all of their kind of less latency sensitive workloads that have been discussed before, you know, like mid and back office, as Gordon mentioned, pre-trade work. And they said, shoot, you know, the next thing for us is the matching engine, right? And meeting fair and equal access requirements to the cloud, honestly, we can't do that today. Right? That's why when I gave a list of the type of markets that are running in a region, they're either, you know, not to that degree of regulation. They're running micro auctions. That's what Aquis is doing when they're running in AWS on the equity side, or they're quotes. You know, so not latency sensitive, and you can achieve a degree of, you know, performance that institutional traders want. For regulated equity and options exchanges, that's the technical challenge, right? And so we thought about, well, instead of forcing something that isn't a natural fit today, we work with our customers to solve their problems and bring the cloud to them, right? And that took about 2 years of engineering work, and we came up with that solution. From there, we came up with the concept of private local zone, right? A fleet of these services. It could be GPUs, a trend that we're seeing more interest for, like for inferencing at the edge. It could be like these ultra latency, offerings that we have. We're hearing interest for FPGA-enabled instance types in cloud infrastructure too. But like that's kind of where we're investing, because I think I couldn't agree more, right? Those center of gravities are where exchanges are and market participants are, and we want to work with customers and provide choice and meet their requirements.
Cool. Look, so I think we're just about there. So what I'd like to do, and I know you guys all have lots to say, so I'm going to ask you to sort of really keep it to like a sentence or two at most. But let's wrap up by maybe just go down the line and ask you, over the next 12 months, in terms of tech trends, what's the one thing that you think you'd call out that you expect that you're going to see more of, or have a major impact on the market over the next 12 months? You can go first.
With the data center operator, we're looking at power, securing cooling, securing capacity. So there's high growth, and that's the business we're in. So supercharging.
It's a shame we didn't get into that, because I think particularly somewhere that has challenges with load shedding, all this new data analytics, AI is great, but it's hugely consumptive of power. So that's going to be a key issue, and it is globally. But Gordon.
For us, again, selfishly, it's more about moving cloud to the exchange rather than exchange to cloud, right? So that's our focus, and over the next 12 months, we hope to get more exchanges moving our stuff into exchange colocation to provide a service.
Excellent. And Alex, to wrap.
I think more innovation on the data side, right, and building data lakes and data warehouses to power those agile analytics and AI applications on the traditional and Gen AI side. I think you'll see more partnership announcements with market infrastructure providers leveraging the cloud to innovate. And I think, again, that initial trend I mentioned, more and more low latency trading, leveraging cloud infrastructure, as Gordon mentioned, either at an exchange or in region to meet their performance requirements.
There was a lot of commas in that one long sentence.
I cheated a bit, yeah.
No, brilliant. Well, look, thanks, guys, for your insight. I mean, very experienced industry practitioners in the technology space, so that was great. Thank you for your time, and thanks, everyone, for listening, and that's that.
Thanks.
Thank you.